Hey everyone, my name is Sam, and thanks for checking out this video. Make sure to hit the subscribe button down below and give the video a thumbs up. Oh, my necklace always... So this week was, I've read more in other weeks, but I'm actually pretty content with this. And I had my first DNF of the year, which, is kind of exciting, kind of not exciting, but I started off 2017 DNFing my first book, so I'm pretty happy that I got to 23 books before doing that. So let's just jump into it. So the first book that I read this week was Heretics Anonymous by Katie Henry, and I absolutely loved this book. I gave it a 5 out of 5 stars. It's one of my favorite standalones now. This book was so good. If you watched my vlog, you saw how I felt about it too. So this is actually a contemporary novel, which is even more why I'm surprised that I enjoyed it, because I'm not a big fan of contemporary novels. But our main character is an atheist, and he is constantly moving around with his family because of his dad's job. His family relationships are really struggling because of that, as well as being, the teenage years. And he, because of his dad's new job, is brought to this new town where he has to go to a Catholic school. Here he meets, some people who are, very traditional, strict Catholics and Christians, and then he meets some a ragtag group. He makes friends with a gay Jewish boy. He has a hardcore feminist Catholic friend, and, there's a bit of romance going on, and they just kind of try and take on the school and challenge things that they don't deem right or justifiable or fair. Honestly, I don't want to give anything away, but I just overwhelmingly loved this book. Something, the main character being an atheist was something that, I haven't read a lot of characters that I associate with that, because myself I am, and there's not a lot of characters that are atheists in general, let alone that, or they'll have characters that are atheists, but they're atheists because, so-and-so murdered their family and whatever. Some people just are atheists. My family wasn't massacred. It just didn't happen. The comedy in this book, I laughed on the bare minimum, at least on average, once every single page. The first chapter, I just on the floor laughing for, probably 4 or 5 times a page. I've literally thought and made statements like this, and I think I'm hilarious, but, it's just nice to hear someone else say and think things that I know that I say and thought things when I was an atheist going to Catholic school, and I didn't have a ragtag group like him, but, I had friends who were not the most, traditional of, people who you would expect going to Catholic school. So this is just, it's just something that, I'm going to buy every edition of that there ever is printed, if there's more than one, and she's an insta-buy author for me for now. This is her first, novel, I think, but I was just so happy and pleased, and it made my eyes water, and I cannot say enough positive things about this book. If you like comedy, if you like contemporary, if you like romance, if you like friendships, any of that kind of stuff, I would very, very highly recommend it. The next book that I read this week was The Woman Who Smashed Codes by Jason Fagone. This book was incredibly interesting. It gives us the story. I want to make sure I get their names right. Yeah, so it gives us the story of Elizabeth Smith and William Friedman, I'm not sure how to say it. And they are Americans, and it is a true story. And it was so interesting. I had never read any of this. Obviously, because it is a female, women's roles in history have generally been, very downplayed or ignored. But I had honestly just never even heard of her husband as well, which the book comments that he does get the acknowledgement that she does not. So our book is heavily focused on Elizabeth Smith, but it also does incorporate her marriage with William Friedman, because they do work together an awful lot, and she does play such an amazing role in his life. We know Elizabeth, we meet Elizabeth when she tries to go to college. Her parents are Quakers. They're not, very supportive of it, and her mom gets sick, and she's kind of all over the place. She, by chance, ends up going to the Chicago Public Library, meeting a wealthy benefactor who is kind of hoarding, scientists and funding their research at his, manor, which seems ideal, but, we learn along the way that, it is not an ideal situation and it's not perfect, but that's where these two meet, and that is where they start cryptology. This is the entire concept of code breaking. It was something brand new. You used to just have to, intercept people's letters, but now we have the radio, and people were able to, intercept signals and everything. And it was just, so they literally, they don't have a background education in this. He was in, I think, biological sciences, and she did a focus on Shakespearean English, which at first you're like, what does that have to do with code breaking in World War II? But as you go through, you're like, she notices literature, she notices lettering, like, and he's a scientist, so he analyzes it. It was just so, so fascinating, and honestly, it was kind of heartbreaking to see how little she wasn't treated with the same, like, gusto that you hope someone would when they've literally invented a new science that saves a bunch of millions of people during the world wars. This book was really, really interesting. I didn't obviously like intake and understand all of it. It goes through like examples of, how to break patterns and how to notice patterns in different ways. Like you can have like a key and you can have, it was just so interesting, and like she knows like 20 different languages. Like this woman was just crazy, incredible, smart, and a pioneer in this field, and I knew nothing about her. It was so, so interesting. So it's one of those things where you don't have to totally understand all the cryptology information that's coming at you. You can just really understand that, this woman was breaking codes against the Nazis and during like mobsters during Prohibition era in the United States, while like going home and being a mother to like 2 children, having like really no like external support system, and trying to help her husband, who is throughout his entire life battling depression and mental breakdowns, while he is also trying to like get a leg in the field. They're just like kind of suppressed by not being able to tell people a lot of things, and it was just so incredibly interesting, and their dedication to each other and the entire thing, despite the fact that they are not given credit. It talks about how is it Ford? No, the dude who ran the FBI. Hoover, J. Edgar Hoover. And he makes a couple appearances in this, and wow, I did not know a lot. Like, I knew that he thought a lot of himself, I knew that, and not everyone agreed with that, but I did not know all of, like, the inner conflicts of him totally just taking claim to everything and ignoring what everyone says, to the point where American organizations were literally just like, don't give any information to the FBI, we'll talk to the British spy agencies. Like, that was just like mind-blowing to me. It was so interesting. And then I learned more in this book about Latin American history of World War II than I did in any of my undergrad degree in history, in any of my high school courses. I knew nothing of this. It was just so incredibly interesting, and it was told with a little bit of like a kind of a plot and a little bit of a fiction feel, but it was all just so, so incredibly interesting. So I would highly recommend this book. 5 out of 5 stars. The next book that I read this week was The Valiant by Leslie Livingston. This is a reread for me so I can be ready for when my copy of The Defiant, the sequel, gets to me, and hopefully it'll be here on Monday. I'm so excited to read it. And I'm very happy I did reread it, because I read another book with gladiators with a woman after this, and I definitely was mixing the plots up in my head. So our main character, Fallon, is a Celtic princess living in kind of Britain area, and Rome has made, planted feet in the area. Her father has fought Caesar in Rome, and while doing that, he lost Fallon's sister, and she is, trying to, make a name for herself, because her sister, she was a powerful warrior, so she wants to be named a warrior for her father, and it starts off at the beginning of her father decides not to do that and to betroth her to the brother of the guy she's actually in love with. So that's an interesting start. Throughout the book, very quickly, she ends up in Rome through a series of events, which I don't want to spoil because it's super interesting to read. And from there, we enter the world of female gladiators. There's a school, and there is some family drama, and some romance, and betrayals, I guess, kind of, and there's political intrigue. We meet Julius Caesar, we meet Cleopatra. It's just so interesting, all the politics going on. I love when books include that stuff. And I really liked that, she falls in love twice in this book. Like, it's not that whole, like, even at the time, it would have made a little bit more sense, at least just the time period it is. But, like, she's, like, in her mid-teens, and, she was betrothed to someone, but she was in love with a brother, and you know what? Through a series of events, she ends up falling in love with someone else. And I enjoyed that was, like, not the, she falls in love at 15 and never ever loves again kind of thing. So I am just really, really excited to get my copy on The Defiant. It doesn't end on a massive cliffhanger, but there's a lot that can, like, happen from here. So I am just so, so excited to pick up The Defiant. 5 out of 5 stars. I think the first time I read it, I gave a 4 out of 5 stars, but as I reread it, it's just like, there's literally nothing I dislike about this book. I think the first time I was like, oh, it's a bit slow. But as I was reading this, I was like, I don't know what I was talking about. I freaking love this book, so 5 out of 5 stars now. The next book that I read this week was Fatty Legs by Chrissy, Fenton, Jordan, and Margaret Pokayak Fenton. I think that's how you say it. It's Inuit, I believe, so I apologize if I didn't say that right. So this is actually a juvenile book about a girl's experience in the residential schools in northern Canada. If you are unaware, Canada we have a really bad history, and we're just slowly starting to acknowledge it and try and fix things that we did. But whilst like World War II was going on in like concentration camps, we kind of had the same thing going on here. We forcibly took children from homes and families and put them in residential schools that were run by the government through the religious institutions, and children actually had a better chance of dying here than you had of dying in World War II. So this is really interesting, actually, because I don't get a lot of Inuit perspectives just because of geography. Northern Canada, it was a little bit harder to kind of enforce things, just because, people lived on islands where, during half the year you couldn't get to the island unless you had like a boat and that kind of stuff. So this is really interesting because you see how naive a girl is, and she wants to go like, I want to go to school and learn how to read. And the people who have been there are trying to explain to her in like the most juvenile way possible, if no, you don't want to go there. But she ends up going there, and you see, it's much more digestible than some of the other accounts of residential schools. That being said, it still really, really hurt my heart. I think it was like a good way, I think an easy way to explain and introduce the topic to kids, because it is something that is being worked into our school curriculums, and our libraries are now trying to hold programs, and our entire government is trying to hold like truth and reconciliation stuff. So I think it's really important that we read this kind of stuff at really any age. And it was just, the pictures in it are really quite interesting. There's one that really stands out to me. This one here. You can see like the kids hiding under it. I also kind of really like appreciate this book because a big issue with like the whole dealing with it now is the role of religious institutions, and some people get really defensive about it. So I found it really interesting that this book has, there's an evil and a good person both belonging to the same institution. So it's not trying to demonize one institution for it. But yeah, it was just really interesting, and it is the story. Chrissy Fenton Jordan is the writer, and it was her mother-in-law's story, I believe, Margaret. It was her story. So it was really interesting, and I think I'm going to read the sequel. There is a sequel called, I think it's like Not My Girl or something like that. There's a couple juvenile ones I just really, really want to get my hands on and read. It's not a long book. It's just really interesting. So yeah, I enjoyed this book. Throughout the week, I worked my way through The Librarian of Auschwitz by Antonio Turb, translated by Lilith Thwaites, because I believe Antonio Turb originally wrote it in Italian. This was such an interesting book. This is not something that like the concept of literally like they hid a library. And in Auschwitz, it's based on the real-life experiences of Dita Cross, who was a prisoner at Auschwitz, and she does survive. So it was really, really interesting. You meet her future husband, and you meet all these characters, and some of them survive and some of them don't. But the general premise was that in Auschwitz, a bunch of the children were taken and given like kind of a special camp in seniority, and they were, they set up a little school, and everyone's kind of wondering, why this is that, like why are these people getting special treatments? And then in the school, even though they're not supposed to, our main character is hiding books, and then when the SS officers aren't in there, they bring them out so the kids can keep reading and everything like that, and the teachers can do that. And it's just really like, the bravery you have to have in that kind of a situation to try and literally, not just curl in a ball and die, but rather just be like, you know what, we're going to survive, and we're going to make sure that when we survive, we come out of this stronger, and we're not going to let, 5 years here let us, we want to look to the future. We want these kids to be able to have an education and not come out of here at, 15 years old and be illiterate. And it's just so interesting. And it picks up a lot near the end. It definitely doesn't start when Auschwitz starts. It's, middle, nearish the end of the war. And, you meet, we start interacting with, the death walks and, British troops coming in and liberating camps. And, all of a sudden, we've liberated these concentration camps. Awesome, you're free. And then they're like, what do I do? Where do we go? Some of them, some people were dying because they weren't used to eating food, and then they got food and their body just couldn't handle it. So it was just, there's one person almost, it seemed like, that represented a different part, and you got to see a different aspect of it. I would really recommend reading the postscript as well as the what happened to them section as well. But the postscript, we get to learn a bit about Dita. It's just so interesting, and like, you read this, like the author met her, and it's just a little bit of information about their interaction. And, she was just an amazing human being. And there's one quote that I think I'll never forget out of this. Until now, I hadn't believed in heroes, but I know now that they exist, and Dita is one of them. And that, sorry, people who go through these kinds of things, like, I would understand them being angry at the world and everything, but she's not, and I just don't understand how people can be that amazing when people did some truly cruel and horrific things to them for literally just being alive. So it was just, it was just a really, really good book. It's not my favorite all-time World War II book, but I'm really happy I own a copy of it. I think every once in a while I'm going to come back and, it kind of took away and gave faith in humanity at the same time, as like, especially the last postscript. So definitely would highly recommend this book. The next book that I tried to read this week was The Winter Station by Jodi Shields. This was an ARC, and I appreciate getting the art from Nakali. Didn't end up finishing this book. I got to page 30 and gave up. I normally have a rule of getting to page 50, but I felt like I had read a million pages by I got to page 30. I honestly, 30 pages isn't enough for me to even comment or criticize the actual story itself. I think I've met 3 characters, and that was kind of it. Given context, I love Russia. I love historical fiction. I love anything to do with, science and doctors and all that kind of stuff. I normally am able to read a 200 to 300 page book a night, even when I'm working, and, I managed to read The Revolution of Marina M in 2 days. That is an 800 page beast size of a book, okay? It's a massive book, and I ran through it in 2 days. It's also set in Russia. This, it took me 3 days to get to page 30, and oh my goodness. Now, I think this is totally up to people's, preferences of writing. If you're someone who likes overly detailed, over-information on things, maybe this is for you. For me, it felt an awful lot like when you're in university or high school and you're like, oh, okay, you have to write a paper, and it has to be 25 pages long, and you've gotten to page 15 and you literally have no more information that you can add to contribute to your argument, and you're like, so you just start pulling random sentences and quotes from information and just shoving them wherever they fit. And then you're 4 pages between your point and then the conclusion. That's what this book felt like. Just didn't like the writing style overall. It was just, I just found myself immensely bored by page 30 and was just I'm not forcing myself to page 50. This is just ridiculous. So I appreciate the arc, and, maybe I'll look into this author in the future, or she's got some other books. Maybe I'll look in the past and see if it's a little bit different, but this was not a book that I enjoyed, nor did I finish. And the last book that I read this week was Shadow Black by Sebastian de Castel. This is the second book in the Spellslinger series that is going to be, I believe, 6 books. And look at this cover. Oh my god. I don't know that I can really say much about the plot because it is a sequel. But our main character, Keelan, he kind of has magic and kind of doesn't. He's on the lower end of, magic levels, but he's kind of an outlaw right now. And, yeah, he's just kind of running away with his kind of friendly mentor who's a little bit quirky. She's kind of like that weird witch old woman character that you kind of always find. And, he interacts all of a sudden with that mentor's other family kind of thing and who they're trying to save. And, he starts interacting and trying to figure out, there's the Shadow Black Plague, which I can't really explain without spoiling book 1. And they're trying to solve it, and, there's a bit of betrayal, and there's a little bit of romance. It's really cute, high school-y fluff stuff. It's really sweet. And I honestly just love, the fighting and the magic and the tone. Sebastian de Castel is an instant buy author for me. I'm meeting him next week, which I am so freaking excited about, and getting him to sign all of my books. And it's just, there's so much sarcasm and wittiness, and the tone is fun, even though there's, lots of stuff going on, and, I just love the throwing cards, and, she tries to teach him lessons, but in the weirdest way. She honestly reminds me an awful lot of my friend Helmer, who, you'll ask him a story, and he's going on this, big long spiel, a fictional story, and you're like, Helmer, I asked you this question. He's like, but think about it. The story explains it. That is who she reminds me of. But yeah, it's just honestly such a fun book. If you haven't read Sebastian de Castel, I would definitely give it a try, especially if you like your books with some comedy in it. So, 5 out of 5 stars. I read it in one sitting. I think I've done that with all of the books that I've read by him, to be totally honest, too. So those are all of the books that I read this week. Let me know if you've read any of them and what you thought of them. What did you read this week? I'd love to know. Make sure to check the description box down below for links to all of my social media. If you follow me, I will follow you back.